Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Most Dangerous Women at Comic-Con panel. This year, we are going to be discussing how to build a better heroine. But first, I am your moderator, Katrina Hill. I am the author of Action Movie Freak and the 100 Greatest Graphic Novels. I'd like everyone else to introduce themselves.
I'll start. I'm Hanh Nguyen. I'm the senior culture editor at Salon. I'm also a board member of the Television Critics Association.
I'll go. I'm Charlie Jane Anders. I'm the author of a forthcoming young adult space opera novel called Victories Greater Than Death, and I co-host a podcast called Our Opinions Are Correct.
Cool. I'll go. I'm Diya Mishra. I'm a television writer, most recently on Masters of the Universe Revelation.
I'm Dani Fernandez. I have a podcast called Nerdificent on iHeartRadio, and I also just finished writing on The Girls on the Bus, which is a new show coming out on Netflix.
I'm Tamara Brooks. You may know me as Misfits Tamara. I am a writer and culture critic. You've seen my work on DC Universe and a bunch of other places. Also, I'm launching a podcast called Tales from the Tapes, which should be out by the time everybody's watching this.
Great. So this year, like I said, we are going to be discussing how to build better female characters. But yes, we are seeing a little bit better female representation in the media. But now I feel like we're running into a problem with these female characters being very flat, maybe one-dimensional beings just going from point A to point B, and then that's it, it's over. So that's kind of what we're going to discuss. But first, let's take a look at who are some of your favorite fully developed female characters and why.
I will start. I will say all of the women in Black Panther. As a coalition, they represent very complicated, layered conversations that happen within the Black community and how women represent themselves and also their relation to the men that they support and also how they view the world. And so great. And they're also incredibly awesome. And then, let's see, I made a list because that's who I am. And I'm not going to go through everything, but I will say Furiosa from Mad Max.
Oh, yes.
Because, yeah, like that is a rarity in action films in which the female, co-lead actually has as much depth of character development as the male. And well, I don't know if this counts for the decade, depending on how you do it, but I'm also going to throw in Birds of Prey. Because everybody in there is, they're flawed, they're allowed to be violent, and particularly Huntress, who is this just murderous woman on a mission, who is also just the most awkward person ever, and just wants friends, just delightful murder friends. So I'm into all that.
I'll go. I had Furiosa and the Woman of Black Panther as well because they are awesome. And then adding to that, I would say Mako Mori from Pacific Rim. I like that the movie's emotional arc actually belongs to her, and she's the one who really we see grow. Peggy Carter from the TV show Peggy Carter.
Yeah, I was so sad when that got canceled.
I know, but it was a beautiful representation of grief, but also within that rebuilding your life and strength. And I don't think we get that kind of storyline that often. And Ahsoka Tano from Clone Wars, because I like that she gets to start from an authentic juvenile place and where we see her go. And we as the audience are following her to, I don't want to spoil it, but to a decision maybe not everyone would make. But we're allowed to see enough of her internal world that we know why she's making it. I think that's something I really liked.
I'm going to go a little bit off the track here, but I would say Fleabag from Fleabag, because she is a mess. And that is definitely what a woman is sometimes. But even in season 2, you think that it might be falling into this, I need to find love sort of trope, but it doesn't. It definitely veers off into something about self-fulfillment and her relationship with higher power, perhaps, her sister. Just it's so much richer than what you would expect it to be when you even try to describe the show to people. I usually just say, just watch it. And then an animated character who's not even human, but Birdie from Tuca and Birdie, who yes, no, Jane, you're a fan. Yeah, and I mean, both characters are lovely, but I definitely identified so much with Birdie. She is full of anxieties, but she's also like channels a lot of her passion into baking, and she's this amazing baker. And you also, by the end of the series, realize where a lot of her anxieties and issues are coming from. It's so deep, and she's so fully realized, even though she's two-dimensional in drawing but not in spirit. And I'm so excited that it got picked up for another season somewhere else.
I'll go. Sorry, were you done? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yes.
It's hard to tell with the Zoom thing. Okay, so I've been going through all my old comics because I'm trying to throw away a bunch of stuff, and you know, I was looking at all the old Milestone comics and the character of Rocket in the Icon comic book. Does anybody remember that? It was like this amazing 90s, you know, totally Black created, Black, you know, hero comic book line. And Icon is a version of Superman, but Rocket is sort of his sidekick, but she actually creates the character of Icon. She's the one who decides how he should be a hero, and she kind of turns him into a hero, and kind of she's the hero, she's the protagonist of the series, really, and she's the one who basically is like, we need a hero, I'm going to create one. And it's just such a cool arc. Her relationship with Icon is so great. Also, I've been watching Vagrant Queen, and the character of Alita is so awesome. I love her. I love the way that she tries to reject this kind of messed up legacy that she comes from while still trying to do good. I think that she's so great. And finally, I've been rewatching Legends of Tomorrow with my partner, and Zari, both versions of Zari. Zari is just the best freaking character always. I love her so much. And I just love that, you know, we see different versions of her, but she's always the same strong kind of, you know, powerful woman who is kind of, can be self-absorbed, but also just has a really good heart. I love her. Anyway.
I'll go. So mine is Issa from Insecure. I think going along with Fleabag, she's very messy. You know, in the first season, she cheats, and like there's a whole conversation around that. And also just the relationship she has with other women. Like the biggest relationship is not with her and Lawrence, but rather her and Molly, her best friend, and the arc that they have and how messy they are together, and just showing that growth. So I feel like she's fully fleshed out when it comes to her, not like a lot of her, I feel like love is not just coming from men, right? It's from her, like I said, with her friends, but also her family and like her work. And so she's one of my favorites. And then another one is actually Bulma from Dragon Ball Z. She's like OG anime, because I think she gets written off a lot as being this sexy boy crazy character, but she is the smartest person in that entire show. Like that show doesn't exist without her. She literally created the Dragon Ball radar so they can find the Dragon Balls. She created the time machine to save everybody who died from the androids. She created an antidote to save Goku, who's the strongest character in there because he dies from a heart disease. Like the show doesn't exist without her, and nobody pays attention to that. But she's also like, she's a mom, and I think a lot of things when people say feminism and they're like, oh, but she's in love with a guy, so she's not a feminist. And I'm like, I really hate that. And you guys need to stop doing that. And I feel people do that with Issa. I feel them do that. I see them do that with Diana Prince. It's like, you're allowed to love who you love and still be, I'm not going to cuss, still be a bad A feminist. So those are my two queens that have really affected how I write too, even my love stories. So
yeah, you know, feminism is not hating men or not falling in love. It's like you can absolutely do all of that. But anyway, so what are some of the biggest strides that have been made in characterizations in the past 10 years?
Ooh, I would 100% be, so I am so excited that women of color are in the leads for shows, and they're not necessarily the masculine stand-in. So I would say, like, for example, Michael Burnham in Star Trek Discovery, despite her name being Michael, which is just that's a thing that's something else. I don't want to discuss that. But I remember when the show was about to begin and people were like, wait, how do you have the lead be a woman and she's not the commander? And that was like a really strange thing for people to wrap their minds around, that you don't have to be in command. You don't have to be the one beating up people and doing all of these typically, masculine things to be the lead and to have like this emotional, like really strong storyline. Her being actually the rebel made her so much more intriguing, I felt. I also like that she's kind of like into science. Those are things that actually resonate more with me. And I would say probably on the flip side of that, something more recent would be, I think, Lily Chan from Devs. Super smart, tenacious, asks questions, is able to fool people, yet is not like, beating up people and doing all that stuff. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love seeing someone kick butt, but it's just refreshing. And also it's never made an issue really, like it's only mentioned like once that she might be from China. It's not super important to her identity. And that for me is just like, it just makes things so much better. So like to actually see that has been fascinating for me.
I wanted to hop on as far as what you were talking about with women of color, because one of my favorite movies that came out the last 2 years was Girls Trip. And we had 4 Black women who were all so different. Because that's the thing, is I think a lot of times it's all of us get placed in like the same box, and like me being a Latina, it's like we're all the same, and Black women, it's like they're all the same. And I was like, no, you can have a diverse cast, like they're literally all different characters, just showing how different they are, but are still able to have friends. And they got to just have fun and be sex positive and wild and having a good time. It didn't have to like involve a hate crime or someone's parents being deported, or like sometimes it's just nice to get to see our joy. I'm not saying that those stories aren't relevant and necessary, or ones that I've also written, but I would like us to be able to do both. I don't think that we should only be allowed to have trauma and pain with our representation. I think we can have that, and then we can also have joy and just a bachelorette party and just wildness. But going off of that, I also wanted to say Moana. I love the fact that we're seeing more Disney princesses, because so many people, I mean, I'm still a part of Disney, like I've been since I was a lot of us don't grow out of it, is what I'm trying to say. And so the fact that this character and more characters like her are going to exist, where as much as I'm a hopeless romantic, it doesn't mean that everybody needs to have a romance in their story to be valid. So I love that we're seeing more of that, and I hope that we continue to see more of that.
Off that, I wanted to say, I think it was the male character, but it's written just like you would write a male character. I think right now we're seeing characters where their identity or otherwise actually inform how we write. Like that's been nice to see.
I think that, there's been more, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I think that there have been more female and trans and non-binary creators behind the scenes working on these characters. And I think that that's been a huge sea change, because, you've always had female leads, you've always had tough female characters, but, when they're written from the standpoint, when they're written by people who are coming at it from like the dominant culture and the dominant kind of perspective, you can't get those nuances necessarily. You can't get characters who reflect, the lived experience of women and trans and non-binary people. And I think that that's a thing that has only really changed in the last 10 years in a really serious way. Like there's been a huge freaking glass ceiling behind the scenes in television, in movies, even in books, in comics, there just haven't been that many creators. And so, you know, it's really proves that representation, you know, in front of the camera or in terms of who gets to be seen as the hero is important, but so is representation in terms of who gets to actually tell the story and be the creator.
Tamara, if you're talking, we can't hear you. Okay, yeah, in doing research, a little bit of research for this panel, I came across an article that was like, you know, a list of written excerpts from a book of men writing women, and it was mostly all just like the women, you know, looked in the mirror and it was mostly all about breasts, you know. There was like 20 different excerpts from books, and they were all these female characters obsessed with their breasts, and we're like, yeah, no, that's not quite accurate. So it's nice to have sometimes, you know, some women writing women or trans writing trans or whatever. Not to say that we can't, you know, men can't write women well, but it's just, you know, sometimes they don't always understand the little nuances.
Yeah,
I think.
Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, well, there's two things I was going to say. Well, so piggybacking off of Moana, which Dani brought up, I think what's most interesting about that is not just the lack of love interest, but she got basically no help, kind of. Like, she had the ocean, but of her two animal companions, she got the dumb one. So, like, literally no help except for, like, accidentally eating this, you know, doing a thing at one point. But, like, so that's really interesting because that was her looking into, you know, basically a mirror, which is like her reflection in the ocean, and deciding that she was going to push through and do that stuff. It was kind of a lesson in self-reliance, which I thought was really cool. But I think that generally, like we were saying, we're seeing more inclusion in the writers' rooms, and we're seeing more inclusion on the director's side. We're still not quite there in showrunners, but we're getting better. And I think all of that, you're seeing that in the well-roundedness of the characters now. And I feel like the biggest leap is that people are writing female and non-binary characters as people. They're not just, this is this Black best friend, or this is this Latina, maid, or, you know, just like these very specific storyline, like tropes that we could not break out of, no matter how hard you're like, but this person's here. And it's like, no, but you're still treating them like that. So I think that, and that's, as much as, you know, I would like to give credit to the writers having a thing, it's because we've been yelling at them for like 15 years about this also.
Yeah, oh, and really quickly, sorry, I would never say that men can't write women or that men shouldn't write women. I just think that when men see women writing women, it makes men better at writing women.
Also,
yeah, off that,
other chance.
I was gonna.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I think when we talk about this and we talk about authenticity, frankly, that's just good writing. We're just asking for good writing. All characters should come from a place of authenticity. All characters should be full people. And I think so often detractors of this kind of conversation are like, you're pushing an agenda. No, I'm just asking people to do their jobs. Like, we just want to be written like, well, that's it.
So what are some of the most common pitfalls creators and writers fall into when writing female non-binary characters?
I have my biggest one that I hate that is still active today, and it is the nagging mom, because you pair her with the dumb dad. So the dumb dad is the Peter Griffin, the Homer Simpson, the Tim the Toolman Taylor, it's the whatever. They get to always have the punchline. I was about to name one, but I can't remember now. But there's many. You could think of it. It's like endless now. It's all on network television. Oh, Phil Dunphy, love him, but still, Modern Family. It's the dumb dad trope. And what happens is it makes the mom the naggy, wet blanket. It's just like they're not able to partake in the fun. And so they're starting to change that a little bit. I see on network TV of like making the mom like the wild one or whatever, but I think it's just like, it doesn't allow, being in the comedy community and being a comedy writer, it just feeds the narrative that women aren't funny. And it's because they're not allowed to, because in these writers' rooms, which are heavily men, I also feel like there has been one where I was not only the only person of color, but the only woman in the room. And I remember, I'm going to say this because the show didn't go through because it was trash. But so nobody knows and they're not watching this, but they had a joke, one of the men, and it was all older men. And I'm like, y'all aren't funny. Like, this is why I'm sorry, I'm going to say it. But one of their jokes was having this teen come in and he was like, hey, what's up squad? Like, what's lit fam? And I'm like, he wouldn't say that. Sir, he would not. I was like, you know what? You want to make this funny? Make the dad say that, because that's funny. The dad is like, what's up, my squad? That's lit. Like, he clearly doesn't get it. The actual teenager would not say this. You have the teen then be like, okay, dad, you know, like that's, but it was just wild where I am now going on a rant. But what I was going to say, the dumb dad or whatever, allowing women like Fleabag to be messy and be the funny ones, and they get the punchline, they get this, like, they're the ones that get to be the comedic relief and not having to be a wet blanket, and it's still active today. So when you see that in script, it's definitely scripts, it's like a red flag for me.
Even sci-fi and stuff is not, you can't get away from that, because in Guardians 2, they turned Gamora into a nagging mom.
Yeah. And the men get to be silly and fun and goofy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm silly and fun and goofy. Like, you know, like, let us play. Make the man the wet blanket. Yeah.
I mean, you know, we're still kind of getting stuck in tropes. Like, that one is very active. And I also feel like people get the concept of diversity, but they're not doing it all the way. So it's not inclusion. It's just, hey, there's this brown person here, and we're going to have them say 3 lines and then go away into the background. Like, maybe you'll see them walking around or nodding their head emphatically to a thing. Just not like, you go through the trouble of having somebody in your cast. And this is, I'm mainly talking about, like, you know, network TV or just, you know, TV shows in general. So you'll put somebody on the cast, but you won't actually give them the time. Like, you can't even, like, on The Flash, until basically like last season, even Iris wasn't doing that much, and she's the co-lead technically. So, you know, what do we have to do? What do we have to do to get, you know, people to have, you have 22 episodes. You can't give one to the brown person? Okay, cool. So that is a thing. And I also feel like, because, like you're saying, like Dani was mentioning, the lack of sort of representation in writers' rooms, when you do not have more than one woman or more than one brown person, then those kind of very flat, weird, like, I saw this on Twitter once, lines get through that represent like authentic conversation from this person, where nobody would literally, you know, how do you do, fellow kids? Nobody would say that. Hello, fellow brown people. What is crack-a-lacking? Like, nobody does that.
An example of how they did that really well, I believe, is in Mindy Kaling's Never Have I Ever, where they have a teacher who is very woke, and I use that word deliberately because he thinks he's very woke, and he uses all of the lingo and is very in touch with his feelings and wants to dialogue with the students, and it's so cringy, but he's meant to be, because he's in between. He's trying to reach the students, but he's also definitely aged out of whatever way that they're actually thinking. And yeah, so, and of course this is a woman of color led show, writing a lead character who is not just her racial identity. There is some of that in there, but it's way more than that. I love how she's boy crazy, because that's an example of something that's like, yes, she's a teenager. And so I think the two things that I find like kind of get my goat a lot still is, there's a step forward in period dramas of including people of color, and I really am excited about that. And some people do it fairly well. Harlots, I think, on Hulu does it well. But sometimes, like, let's say in Sanditon, that was just on PBS, which is a Jane Austen staple, the character ended up being more of like, sort of, first of all, just falling into all the female tropes of like getting, you know, caught up in marriage and men and stuff like that, but also was sort of a spokesperson for like anti-slavery or something. And so it was just like, I get it. At the time, maybe that's all it would have been, you know, but honestly, people of color were in all sorts of strata, and Europe, not just staying in Africa and Asia, or their islands, just so those are small strides, but not very much. And so they end up being kind of flat. And the other thing I would say is older women characters are very rarely in shows without being the old person. You know, that's not their identity. I think somewhere that they did it really great is a Netflix German show called Dark, where people, you see them in various ages in their lives, and they have a bigger storyline to deal with. So you see characters, there's one named Claudia, who we definitely see is way more than just being an old person. In fact, she's very much taking control of the storyline and is a major force in the show. You see a little bit of that in Grace and Frankie, as far as like having fully fleshed characters. But for the most part, if you are over 50, 60 on a show, you are the old woman and you're in the background and you have really no other role than being old. So yeah.
I wanted to say that's why I'm so excited that like Selma Hayek is on the Eternals, because I think she's 54, being a superhero. I'm ready. And also just our silver-haired queens that are in Terminator and having Jamie Lee Curtis in
Yes.
Halloween. I'm like, please, they can kick my butt currently right now. So I want to see them, even if they're in their 50s and 60s, kicking butt. So.
Any other
Christian, the actress who plays Christian on The Expanse is a great example.
Love her so much. She's so great. I mean,
yeah,
me,
and she's.
Sorry, go on.
Oh no, continue.
No, you go.
Oh, I was just off what Dani was saying. She's another example of a character who is on the older side and isn't either constrained by that or having to overcome it or whatever, for whatever the storyline is. She has her wealth of experience, and that is her strength in the show, which I find really empowering.
Yeah, I was just going to say that for me, it's like this thing where, you know, you have like the super tough, badass female character. Sorry, I said badass. The super tough, you know, unstoppable female character. Maybe they can edit that. I don't know. Who, you know, is just like for the first half of the movie or for the first like several episodes of the TV show is just like comes in and saves the dude every time. And then suddenly she's just incapable of doing anything so that the dude can finally step up and show that he's tough. And she just loses all of her abilities when the plot needs her to, and she doesn't have any other character traits usually. She's just like the tough chick. And, you know, I feel like there's been, I feel like that's a trope that gets super old that I've seen a million times, including recently.
Yeah, I'd say my least favorite trope is similar to that, where it is the tough chick, it is the, you know, the badass, but there's always that episode where she breaks and she has to show softness, and that scene is like the character development. And for me, I'm always like, she could be soft in other ways, but it doesn't need to break through that badassness, that strength. It doesn't need to be one or the other. And I feel like generally, I think you see a lot of narrative arcs that have that tipping point where she like confides in the male hero, and then she's like, we get her now. And I don't like that.
I would like to shout out Sailor Jupiter, who is one of the most perfect combinations of soft and tough that in the history of all everything.
Yes. I'd say Okoye too. I love her.
Correct. Yes.
That moment when she's like, I'm loyal to the throne, not to the oh my God. Like that's the way to do it.
I love her.
There's also the phenomenon of the sexy lamp character where, you can basically replace the female character with a lamp and it wouldn't change the story at all. So,
I just wanted to bring up, like, obviously we're all aware of fridging, but like it is insane how much it still happens. I am shocked that there is so much literature on fridging, and yet people that to me is like, you don't have women involved in this. They would automatically, especially us like in the sci-fi and nerd community, be like, excuse me, like this is literally what you did to this character. It's just, what is it, 2020? It's just wild to me that it still exists. And the list is just ever growing of us having to watch, even in the middle of a movie, I'm like, what? You just killed her just so that he can get angry and go off and now he's going to solve this crime. I don't know how it still, I do know how it still exists, but that to me is always the biggest red flag and just triggering. It's just triggering to me that like our death is in pain or being maimed is necessary for men to then seek revenge or go off on their journey.
I was actually most shocked that it happened in Deadpool 2 because the first movie was really good about building her as a character and like making her an actual like three-dimensional human, and then Deadpool 2 happened and I was like I was very confused. I was very, very confused.
That's why I actually didn't even watch Deadpool 2, because I'm kind of just done with that.
Yeah.
It's interesting how much, this goes into privilege, but like how much people don't pay attention to the things that don't immediately come into their experience. Like I know of someone I respect, a white male TV critic who, when reading something of mine, I think it was last year, about fridging, was like, well, now I learned a new term. And I was like, how do you just learn this term? You've been doing this job for how many years? And I was just like, even if you didn't know it, it's a problem. So I don't know. I was just baffled. And so, yeah, we just need to keep talking about it. I call it out every single time.
I have one more thing that I wanted to say on that, because some of the films that I watch, like whether it's horror or sci-fi, but where a woman is tortured and then killed, and it was like one that I watched where it was clearly to make the audience uncomfortable, the way that it was done, and she was also nude. It was a whole thing. But I remember I was sitting with a bunch of other people like in the industry and everyone loved the movie. I wanted to leave, but in my opinion, I was like, that scene that happened, what do you think they were trying to do? And it was like horrified, like they were trying to make you uncomfortable. I was like, great. So do you think there's another way that they could have done that? Are you telling me that every time that's the only way? Because that to me is just bad writing. It's sloppy writing and it's lazy writing. And it's been happening in cinema since the invention. So it's like, are you really telling me that's the only way that you can get that same reaction? I understand the reaction you're trying to get from the audience. Now, are you a good enough writer and director to push yourself to get the same reaction from doing it differently? Like that to me, but it's still wild how much it happens. Yeah. So sorry, that is this has been my soapbox.
Rape and torture as a device, like a plot device. Like, no, this is a person, it's a character, a potential character you could do something with. Why do that? And I have noticed, not to get off track, but sometimes they've been doing that to animals instead of people, so that way they don't have to deal with the blowback from like torturing a person. But like, it's still the same thing. It's sloppy and lazy writing.
Mm-hmm. And it's still women being seen primarily as, or not primarily, but also always as sexual beings, right? Like you can be all these other things, but we need to remind the audience about like, this is a woman, and like the smaller version of that is the changing scene battle. The female character is gonna like get into her kit, and the male character is gonna like spot her halfway changed, and just to remind the audience, like, by the way, she's hot. And that's something that always drives me up the wall.
One of the things that I guess I appreciated in the Marvel shows that were on Netflix, like specifically when I was looking at, I think the second season of The Punisher, where it was not sexual, like the violence, I think he was going against 2 female assassins and just punched them and they punched him back. And it wasn't like also a hand up the skirt. Also, they weren't wearing a skirt because they didn't need to be wearing a skirt to fight crime or fight the assassins, which is another thing. But it wasn't like, and he chokes him and then they kiss. Like it was just, you know, this. So, but specifically with horror, I just wanted to say this is, it doesn't need to be it's not that I'm saying, obviously that's what you go and you watch and it's terrifying and there's violence. It doesn't need to be sexualized or glorified, especially when you have naked women and you're like sexualizing what's happening. And it can be straight horror. And then for people that are like, but these things do happen, like rape does happen. Okay. And we have seen that. We have seen that in media. We continue to see that in media. So stop being lazy and get better. That's just what I want to say, because I know people are going to respond and like, it does happen. I'm like, okay, and I've seen it. And Latinas, there are Latinas that are maids. I've seen it. I'm done with it. Like, get something new.
Yeah, but those, it's like those aren't the only things that happen to women and Latinas.
And there are other ways of signifying that your bad guy is a bad person that does not involve traumatizing your audience. And also, I forgot this thing, but Diya reminded me of it, is when you have a female non-humanoid alien or creature, but you give them boobs.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Why do they have boobs? There's no reason for this.
There's no reason.
This like praying mantis humanoid to have boobs. They do not have boobs.
Because that's the female representation in the movie. Just
right, and you can't give them sexy armor if they don't have boobs, right? Like you gotta have that boob window situation happening, and you know if you don't give this rock creature that's a female rock creature boobs, how are you gonna know?
Yeah, because you know obviously we have to label them with a gender too.
And one more thing about using rape as a device or sexualized horror as a device is the unintended effect or intended effect, but what it's done essentially is make that sort of trauma consumable, and that does have a real world effect. Like that does affect the way we see those crimes. It does affect the way we pass over them if we see them. Like if we become used to that sort of trauma, and look, like stories should be a reflection of our world, but when that's the only thing we see, then we get used to it. We're like, yeah, okay, sure, why not? And that goes for representation across the board, right? Like when we see, you know, brown people always as terrorists or whatever, like then we get used to it. And for better or worse, our brains do work in a way where they do create a shortcut. And we just need to be conscious of that as storytellers, I think.
What other kind of impact does lack of representation have on society?
I mean,
where do we start?
I know. We're seeing it right now, right?
Yes.
Because basically, this is something I've always discussed with people because they're always like, well, why is it important just so you see yourself on screen? I'm like, well, A, that would be nice, but also it's for everyone else to see us on the screen in different contexts. Because if you're not seeing a Black person, a trans person, non-binary person as a regular everyday person, they're otherized. And that it makes it easier in life to treat them as other and non-human, lesser than, and ignore them. And this happens all the freaking time. So yeah, we are seeing those effects right now of less representation, and just people not understanding this other person is just like you. So yeah, that's been my biggest thing from day one, you know, just we're people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's not just about representation, it's about kind of showing the interiority of you know, being a person, and kind of showing that, you know, women and trans and non-binary and women of color and just everybody who hasn't been represented on screen until recently has like the same kind of complicated inner lives as everybody else, and has like, you know, a life that's not just about their marginalization, but that is about all this other stuff. And that's what's so great about, you know, some of these characters we've been talking about, where you actually get to have stuff that's completely unrelated to their identity. Like Never Have I Ever is so great for that. And like, you know, I feel like Zari in Legends of Tomorrow is great that way too. Her identity comes up a lot, but it's not who she is. It's not what defines her. And she has a lot of conflicts and a lot of issues going on that are kind of, you know, related to the plot or related to just all the things that all the other characters are dealing with. And I feel like that kind of thing does have a huge impact in terms of making people think about the people they interact with in the real world. It just changes how you think about the people around you if you have connected that dot and you know, oh yeah, maybe everybody has an interior life, and maybe, you know, maybe everybody has feelings and desires and needs. I mean, gosh, it's kind of a shocking concept, but you know, it could actually be real. I don't know.
Another problem oh, go ahead.
I'm done.
I was going to say another problem with the lack of representation on a show is that you're actually not able to have fully fleshed out characters, because let's say you have a show and it only has one Black character. Well, then if they mess up or if they commit a crime or if they cheat or whatever, they are representing the entirety of their community because that's the only person that you have on that show. Whereas if you had 3, 4, 5 Black characters, you're able to have one be like, that's the messy friend and blah, blah, and then here's the tech genius or whatever. Like you're able to have, and they could all be the same person, but you need to have multiples of those characters, because what I have seen, and I don't know if y'all in other writers' rooms have seen, is people are very hesitant. Like, oh no, they can't mess up because then we're saying that it's racist and I don't want to make them the flawed character. And it's like, well, if you had more of them, then people wouldn't think your show is racist, because they'd be like, oh, but you know, they make up for it with this other. And like that, you know, you're able to have not just one character being the entire voice of that community. So to me, it seems like an easy fix is just like have more characters of color. And you don't just have the one token character, but people are still holding on to not doing that. But that to me is one of the effects of not having enough representation, is then you actually do have really flat characters because you're too afraid to do anything with them and take risks with them, because then if they're representing the flawedness of them is representing their entire community.
Yeah, like one show that I think about a lot is Brooklyn Nine-Nine, where you've got Diaz and Santiago, and they both get to be really messed up in different ways, and they get to make terrible mistakes, but nobody thinks that either one of them represents, you know, a whole group of people. They're just complicated characters.
Time and time again, we have seen historically the impact that having a show with a lead that is not a straight white dude has positively influenced, you know, small pockets of the Midwest who maybe don't have a lot of diversity, or the community doesn't feel safe for people who are marginalized to come out and represent. You know, in the 90s with Will and Grace and with the Ellen Show, that made gay people very consumable and friendly to the masses. RuPaul's Drag Race has made drag culture and gay more representative, and some trans people, because a lot of the contestants, or a couple of contestants, have transitioned since appearing on the show. That when you see people that are not like you being able to actually be people, then you will see them as people. And as we're seeing in real life now, if you have generations of cop shows where the only time, everything that a cop does is justified, and all of their brown, you know, people that they victimize are actually have it coming, or it's, you know, even in shows like The Shield, where, you know, it is about corruption, they still find a way to make their actions justified, or at least the audience that's consuming it, because they are the main characters, feel like they're justified, like Breaking Bad. And then the people who are stopping the people who are the main characters who are doing bad things end up becoming antagonists. And so you are pushing people further in the margins than they already are. And that's awful, because again, we are seeing how that is now. And so I just feel like, you know, having Dreamer on Supergirl is amazing. They treat her very well. They're not doing anything wonky with her character. She has a romance and nobody's blinking at it. It's great. So being able to have more cases, you know, Black Panther showing a different a kind of conversation within the Black community that no one's ever seen before, and specifically not in the superhero space, is amazing. And so we get to see, oh, look at these kids being able to look at not just someone that looks like them, but someone that doesn't look like them, that they can look up to and want to be like. And that's ultimately how you get everybody on the same footing.
All right, with that, I think we'll end right there. We're kind of out of time, but real quick, if you want to go through, remind if you have, you know, something to plug us, you know, if you're on social media or if you have a podcast or whatever, you can go through and say that real quick.
You can find my writing at salon.com. On the socials, I am Hanonymous, HANHONYMOUS. I also do co-host a podcast about Asian American pop culture called Good Pop Culture Club.
You can find me on the Twitters and very, very occasionally on the Instagram at Misfits Tamara. Everything that I do, I will plug. I will have that podcast called Tales from the Tape. Tales from the Tape's coming out. I believe my Twitter handle for that is Tales from Tapes. And if not, then I'll plug it on my regular Twitter and you'll find that. And thank you.
Go ahead, Charlie.
Go ahead, Charlie.
I'm at Charlie Jane on Twitter, and I have a young adult novel coming out next spring called Victories Greater Than Death.
I'm on the Twitter at the DIMISHRA, and when I know things are coming out on Netflix, I'll put it there. Dani, I think you're on mute.
Not anymore. Okay, good. I'm at Ms. Dani Fernandez. It's MSDANIFERNANDEZ. I'm actually on a couple episodes of The Great Debate, which is on Sci-Fi, drops this Thursday. And it'll be coming out all this month and into July. It's just comedians battling about geeky nerd stuff. So yeah.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in and watching, and hopefully next year we'll be able to do this in person. All right. Bye-bye.